Powered by Righteous Media.
Welcome to Independent Americans. Welcome to episode 332. I'm your host, Paul Rieckhoff. And welcome to Radio City Music Hall. Welcome to Midtown Manhattan. Welcome to May. And after all that April rain and all those showers, May will hopefully produce some flowers, but it will definitely produce many reasons for us all to stay vigilant. Coming up, I've got an exclusive conversation with Washington Post defense reporter Dan Lamothe, who is back to break down the latest in all the chaos that's happened at the Pentagon. But before we get to that, we're going to do a quick walk and talk across Midtown Manhattan on a beautiful evening. Behind me is the NBC Studios, 30 Rock, the place where I often do television. I just finished a conversation with Ali Velshi, who was filling in for Nicole Wallace at Deadline White House. Behind me is the famous 30 Rock. Back over there is where the Christmas tree is at Christmas time. Down there is usually an ice skating rink. So, as I continue to take you on this walk through beautiful Manhattan on a beautiful evening, so let's go from the top of the rock to my top topics. The famous toy star F.A.O. Schwartz is right behind me. Right over there is Radio City Music Hall, where a couple years ago, I went in person to witness the NFL draft, which is actually one of my top topics this week. And here's why. It's a night of inspiration. It's a uniquely American moment where hard work pays off. You see young men and their families and their coaches and their teachers who've worked their entire lives for this moment of congratulations, this moment of celebration, this moment of community. It was a rare shared experience where millions of Americans all watched together, something that doesn't happen very often except for the Super Bowl and natural disasters and elections. If you watch NBC, that giant election board would be right over there. But there's a deeper story also happening this week. Eagles star running back and Super Bowl champion Saquon Barkley did something rather controversial. He met with President Trump. He played golf with President Trump and took a picture with him at the White House. Now, some might think this is no big deal, but as a lifelong Giants fan, when Saquon Barkley was traded to the Eagles, I told my kids, he's a good dude, he's a leader, and we will always be Saquon Barkley fans. I could even take it if he went to the Eagles. But this I could not stand for, because Trump used him for propaganda. He used him as a prop. And it wasn't leadership. It was bending the knee, like so many others are bending the knee and kissing the ring for Trump right now. But some leaders did stand up. Jalen Hurts and a number of the other Eagle players refused to go to the White House, refused to have their picture taken, refused to be used by Trump for his radical agenda. And to them, a tip of the hat or a tip of the helmet. For most of all, standing on your values and for staying vigilant. I bring it up because it's an important, larger issue. Saquon isn't the only one bending the knee and kissing the ring. Looks like 60 Minutes and CBS have done the same, like so many white shoe law firms have also done. And in a moment of spectacular fealty, one that we've never really seen the likes of, the same is true of South Carolina's sellout Senator Lindsey Graham. Check this out. This week, I'm not kidding, Lindsey Graham said that Trump should be the Pope. He should be able to serve as Pope and President. Check out this tweet. That's a real tweet. Few have fallen more than Lindsey Graham, and few are a more spectacular demonstration of what bending the knee, kissing the ring, and completely selling out looks like than Lindsey Graham. Speaking of fealty, There are few places that have been more complicit in the rise of Trump than the place behind me. You may not know this, but just a few blocks away from MSNBC is Fox News. That is the headquarters of News Corp, Fox News itself. And as the knee bending and fealty continues, so does the crazy. And there's one issue from this week that I can't let slide. I've talked in the past about the proliferation of conspiracy theories, especially around 9/11, which happened down there. Well, this week, the master conspiracy theorist herself, radical crazy person Laura Loomer, who I've mentioned on this show, who's apparently been advising Trump, singled me out on Twitter. She called me out by name, misrepresented my position, and sicked her minions on me, which is not surprising, a bit alarming, and in the end, maybe helpful, because all she did was elevate how thoughtful and reasonable we are in contrast to her craziness. This is why you need to watch on YouTube, because if you're watching, you'll see that I'm in Fox Square. I'm actually outside of Fox News headquarters, right here, right there. Sean Hannity and the rest of them are up there somewhere. It's a perfect place to tell you about another issue that involves conspiracy theories, radicals, fealty, and, of all people, a U.S. senator. The proliferation of 9/11 conspiracies has really gotten out of control. Now it's gone fully into the Senate, where radical Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, who is himself a promoter of 9/11 conspiracy theories, wants to hold hearings to hear about conspiracy theories related to 9/11. So Senator Ron Johnson wants to create a public forum to elevate, perpetuate, and exaggerate 9/11 conspiracy theories. These are the people who feel 9/11 was an inside job. This is wrong for so many reasons, but especially as a 9/11 first responder myself, I and all of us in the 9/11 first responders community will be pushing back and pushing back hard, and I ask you to watch this space, and most of all, stay vigilant. So, we go from one of my least favorite places, Fox News, to one of my favorite places in the entire city, and one of my son's favorite places for sure, the Major League Baseball store. If you've never been, I highly recommend it. This goes on my Rieckhoff's recommendations. If you come to New York, go to the Major League Baseball store. It is awesome. But few things are more American than baseball, and this is a great time of year for baseball. Baseball reminds us what America's all about, what Americans are all about. And it reminds us so often that Americans are usually viewed as the good guys. But lately, that's not been the case around the world. Because we learned this week, as the ICE roundups and deportations continue, that this week, ICE deported 3 children this week, ages 2, 4, and 7, including one of them that was going through cancer treatment. This is not who America is. This is not what the good guys do. This is what the bad guys do. And no matter what party you claim, deporting little kids with cancer is not something that Americans like or support. And that's why it's no surprise that Trump's approval numbers are cratering with Americans, and especially with independent Americans. Fox News, right over there, reports a 47% drop among independents just in April in their support for Trump. The New York Times showed a 37% drop, and CNN a 36% drop. Americans don't like things that are un-American, like deporting little kids with cancer. And that's especially true of independent Americans. Watch this space and stay vigilant. So, as we leave the MLB store behind us and make our way north on 6th Avenue on this beautiful evening in New York, here are a few issues that don't have massive storefronts. Here are a few issues that aren't getting enough attention. Here are a few issues that are below the radar. Every day I walk in a peaceful city like New York, I'm reminded that our friends in Ukraine are not nearly as lucky. As we walk in safe streets, we have no fears of missile attacks. We have no fears of bombings. We have no fears of our children and our women and our civilians being killed every single day by a war criminal in Russia. That's what Ukraine is facing. And below the radar this week, we found out some information that we knew, but is now confirmed. North Korea is now openly admitting that they have sent North Korean troops to fight alongside Russia in Ukraine. It just underscores how Ukraine is the fight of our time. how the Ukrainians are continuing to hold the line, not just for themselves, but for Europe and for freedom. And it continues to underscore why Ukraine's security is about our security. Follow American Veterans for Ukraine for more, and keep an eye out on this space. Don't let it fall below your radar. You wouldn't know it walking around in the streets of New York right now. But all across America, federal workers continue to be fired. And 1 in 3 of every one of those federal workers is a veteran. This has fallen below the radar a bit, but it shouldn't, because the cuts continue and the culture of fear and concern continues to permeate not just the Department of Veterans Affairs, but the entire federal government. Veterans everywhere wake up every morning and wonder if they're going to get an email in their inbox from Doge and Elon Musk telling them that their services are no longer needed, throwing them out on the street despite high performance, despite their service, and despite their value to their agency and to our country. Veterans continue to be disposed of. It's outrageous and it's unacceptable. But the politics of Veterans Affairs in the Senate and House used to be a place where partisanship was left aside. It used to be the one place in the Senate and House where Republicans and Democrats could come together to work in concert to help a group of people that everybody agreed deserved help. But like everything else in Washington, the House Veterans Affairs Committee has become highly politicized and led by extremists. Republican Congressman Bost is now the chair of the House Veterans Affairs Committee. And he's done one of the most political and radical things I've ever seen in 20 years of covering veterans issues. This week, he sent a request to Department of Justice Chief Pam Bondi, asking her to investigate the former Secretary of Veterans Affairs and some of his lieutenants. Bost alleges that the Democrat VA Secretary may have misrepresented himself in some ways before the committee. Now, this is really dangerous territory. Asking the Department of Justice to investigate a former VA secretary, this is weaponizing the Department of Justice against your political enemies. It's way off limits. And if we want to start digging into VA secretaries, we got about a generation's worth that they can start digging into, starting with their own. Starting with VA Secretary Wilkie, who under the Trump administration administered hydrochloroquine to people who were diagnosed with COVID and left thousands of veterans to die from COVID. If they want to open that Pandora's box, there is no shortage of VA secretaries worth investigating. But this is very dangerous. It is highly political. It is unprecedented. And don't let it fall below your radar. As we continue to walk north on 6th Avenue, just toward the south end of Central Park, it's a good time to remind you that despite the chaos, despite the partisanship, despite the radicalism of the Republican Party, that unfortunately, sadly, the Democrats will not save you. Every single week we see a new example of their weakness, their inability to stop Trump and his radical agenda, their inability to stop anything, and their continued overwhelming message of whining. No, ladies and gentlemen, the Democrats will not save you. But there are some powerful voices that are stepping up to meet this moment. And you should not be surprised that they are independent veterans. And one of the most powerful voices among them is retired Navy Admiral and former Navy SEAL William McRaven, who has a powerful new book out, has a strong and rising voice, and could maybe one day be an independent veteran who's a candidate for president. Check this out.
So every leader, when they're in a crisis, particularly when a crisis may be of your own making, you need to confront it head on. You need to be honest. You need to be honest with the rank and file. You need to be honest with your bosses. And the quicker that you come forward with the truth, the quicker you're going to identify what the problems are and begin to solve them. And you have to have a little swagger. You have to have a little confidence. But once again, you better have a little humility going into a job like this, because if you don't, it's going to humble you pretty quickly.
He gives a patriotic, unbiased, and blunt assessment of Hegseth, Signalgate, and all the chaos happening in the Pentagon. In normal times, Admiral McRaven would be our Secretary of Defense instead of Pete Hegseth. But these are not normal times. But in future times, he could be a candidate for president. Watch this space. We're now heading into the southern part of Central Park. Ice cream trucks behind me. Horse-drawn carriages are still a thing. And all around me, our Civil War and other monuments recognizing the leadership of military folks from across time. Leaders who rose to the moment, who sacrificed of themselves for the greater good. And as we continue to look for voices who are rising to meet this moment, there is very exciting news regarding a new voice of an independent veteran who is rising to meet this moment. Brian Bengs is an Air Force veteran from South Dakota who ran previously as a Democrat, but just announced that he is going to run for U.S. Senate in South Dakota as an independent. He's going to run against Republican incumbent John Thune. This is exciting. This is a race to watch because there'll also be a Democrat in the race. Braggs is proving something, that our movement is growing, and that Dan Osborne in Nebraska was just the tip of the iceberg. I've heard from countless veterans who have decided that now is the time to leave the broken duopoly, declare their independence, and step up to run. And I hope Mr. Braggs will join us on this show again soon, because one thing is for sure, the movement is growing. More and more people are declaring their independence, and they are leaving the herds and joining the pack. Watch this space. Central Park, the American treasure that is Central Park. A place of tranquility in a sea of noise and chaos. And that's something we need now more than ever. But there is no peace and tranquility at the Pentagon. The chaos at the Pentagon continues under Secretary Chaos Pete Hegseth as Signalgate continues to expand, as we find out more and more about just how sloppy and incompetent and careless and reckless he and the people around him have been. This week, there is new reporting that he had a private computer installed in the Pentagon just so he could stay on signal. Also, new reporting that reveals his wife has been involved in even more conversations that were also happening on signal. And, of course, there's a swirling controversy about whether or not Trump has had enough and will fire him. Few reporters have been on it more consistently and more accurately for the last few years than friend of this show, the intrepid defense reporter from the Washington Post, Dan Lamothe. And Dan is back on the show now to break down at least 3 scoops he's had in the last week having to do with the Pentagon. We're going to talk about what's next. We're going to talk about what's happening. We're going to talk about what people don't know. And we're even going to talk about the White House Correspondents' Dinner that happened last week and why he did or didn't decide to attend. Especially when there's chaos, accurate reporting is essential. And so is having an oasis. Having a safe place, having a place free from the chaos and noise. That's what this conversation should be, and I hope that's what this show is. A place to cut through the spin, cut through the nonsense, avoid some of the chaos, and give you a little perspective, a little peace, a little oasis of thoughtfulness. If you're not watching us on YouTube, please do so. Wherever you're listening right now, subscribe and share. Because we are going to continue to add light to contrast the heat, no matter how hot it gets. The April showers are bringing some May flowers. So welcome to May 2025. Welcome to Independent Americans, episode 332. Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, May is almost here. When you'll be listening to this in May, and April has been full of showers, and we will see what kind of May flowers it brings. But I am happy and honored to bring back a returning champion, a man who is in the middle of all of the showers and firestorms and blizzards hitting the Pentagon and beyond. The great and powerful Dan Lamothe of the Washington Post is back with us on Independent Americans. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you, Paul.
Well, because they have removed a lot of reporters' space from the Pentagon, let me ask you, where are you and how are you?
I'm in my home office at the moment. I am still in and out of the Pentagon regularly. We gave up our desk, but I still have a badge. I'm still in and out of the building. I'm still making it work. You improvise as you can.
Can we start with that? Because we've been covering this on the show. You've been on to talk about it with us over the months. talk about, does it feel more hostile to the press? And what does it feel like now as we hit 100 days of Trump and almost that much of Hegseth? What's it like working in and around the Pentagon? How is it different from 100 days ago?
Yeah, I mean, as a starting point, there's a pretty firm Stonewall going to the defense secretary's staff for basic questions, basic information. Um, there's very little interaction. There is one briefing in 100 days in terms of the routine touch points. Just basic exchange of ideas and information. Like all of that is pretty much a stiff arm. We're getting a Heisman. Um, there's there are places you can still go for information. There are still people doing their level best. And I think years in the building helps a lot with this. I wouldn't want to be starting new on the beat right now at this time, particularly with a lot of the obvious front doors usually closed. Occasionally they'll answer a stray question or answer a question on a specific story. But a lot of the time, I mean, it's a very common thing if you look at my stories to see so-and-so, a spokesman or spokeswoman for Pete Hegseth, did not respond to comment. I mean, that's the assumption on more stories than not at the moment.
And that's not how it has ever been in the last 20 years. Usually they respond at some point, and even with a generic statement, right?
Yeah, I mean, you might not always get the level of detail you want, or answers to every single question, or sometimes you'll get well, I can't tell you in that level of detail, but I can tell you this. They're mindful of operational security and things like that. We're all kind of aware of that and willing to work around that. This is different. This is just straight up Stonewall more times than not.
So I want to get into some of your recent scoops about Jennifer Hegseth, the Signal computer, the debate internally over the CENTCOM pick. But let's stay on this press briefing piece. The White House Correspondents' Dinner was this weekend. I did not go. I've gone in the past. I don't know if you went. But a key point here that you're getting at, and I watch you and others every Friday, they're not doing Friday briefings, right? They're not doing any briefings. Usually Kirby, right, was Admiral Kirby in the last administration, a Pentagon spokesperson, and occasionally the SecDef himself would stand up and answer questions on a pretty regular basis, on things like troop movements or casualties or significant events. They're not doing that at all, right?
Yeah, I mean, each administration takes a slightly different rhythm and a slightly different format. Under Biden, you saw a lot of briefings on Tuesday or Thursday at the Pentagon. Often one was on camera, one of them was off camera. But either way, it's you're asking questions, you're getting some level of answers. There's at least a place to press a bit farther and to get some of it on camera too, which increasingly in a 21st century matters more and more, not only for television, but for social media and the rest. There were times where it was quite tense during the Mattis Esper era, particularly as they were kind of trying to navigate Trump world and to the degree they could keep the building nonpartisan. They would sometimes navigate that by having briefings, but not on camera. So they would sometimes do smaller interviews rather than big 35 room and 6 television camera style. But I think there was at least a good faith effort that doesn't look at all like what we're seeing right now.
And I assume, but I don't want to assume, you're not getting invited to ride along with the SecDef and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs like you have yourself for the last decade or so, right?
Yes, that's fair. They have not invited the Washington Post and a lot of other major news outlets yet in 100 days. I did get down to the southern border on a one-off that somebody somewhere had to sign off on, but that is really the one and only actual, with the troops or with the secretary or with principals sort of story that I've done this year, really.
But who was it? Laura Ingraham, I think, got to ride along with Hegseth down to the border, right? They're giving the VIP treatment to folks like Laura Ingraham, doing a lot of direct to camera, not having you all on the plane like you have in the past. the White House Correspondents' Dinner was this weekend. Can I ask you, do you go? And is there, do you have a take on that? Because it was a time where they removed the comedian. They call it Nerd Prom. I've been before. There's nothing quite like it. But do you go? And if so or not, why so or not?
I've never been. For me, it's kind of adjacent to the work I do, not the work I do. But there's obviously no shortage of hot takes on whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. I guess I see the value in it, but I also see the optics in it and see that being challenging for journalists in the 21st century. So I'm not spoiling to get in. If I guess if I got invited, I would have a dilemma. But that's where it's been, and I'm fine with that.
Mm. Yeah, I've had a lot of folks tell me they don't go because they don't want to cozy up with the people they report on. And if you've been, like I've been, it's a lot of parties and after parties and drinking. And I don't think I've ever seen so many drunk on air people in my life. But I could see how that could blur your impartiality. I mean, Rachel Maddow, as an example, has always told me she never goes because she doesn't want to get too close to these people, and I could see that. But let's dig into the reporting stuff because there's no shortage of it. Signalgate is just kind of an ongoing thing. And I frankly am worried that people have become desensitized to it. But each 24, 48 hours, it seems like we have a new revelation. You have new reporting this morning about, it seems like, a new Signal chat that was previously unreported that also underscores the extent to which Jennifer Hegseth, Pete Hegseth's wife, is involved in conversations. Can you just give us the highlights of your latest reporting?
Yeah, this is a much smaller group, basically handling DoD communications, DoD comms strategy, that sort of thing. It was organized by the secretary. It also included Jennifer Hegseth, and then Sean Parnell and Tammy Radabaugh, who are both, senior communications officials on their staff. I don't know what was said in there. I don't know if there was any classified information. I found it newsworthy, particularly in light of all the other reporting, that Jennifer Hegseth appears to be involved on a much more serious level. I can't speak for present tense, but certainly in the opening days. Not only the occasional meeting that she was popping up in, and the trips where you sometimes in the past have seen spouses on those trips in other administrations as well, but literally saying, "Hey, can we do this?" Like literally involved in the planning process, informing Pentagon officials of which interviews her husband would be doing. That's abnormal. And that speaks to her having at least an unofficial role that goes well beyond sort of plus one and official and commissary to the troops and the families, to like literally, hey, let's plan out how we can message on XYZ.
She sounds like his handler, right? And there's been additional reporting from internal sources who are still unnamed where they say they call her Yoko Ono behind her back. They say she's like a leash to Hegseth. I mean, I think the most important part is she has no formal role. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think she's done a security or background check. And she is a former, Fox News producer. So her background is in communications. So it seems like she's potentially crossing some lines that have not been crossed before.
It's awkward and uncomfortable for a number of people that I have talked to about this over really 90, 100 days at this point. I think initially it was a curiosity. Hey, she's popping up at all these confirmation meetings. You're watching her go with Pete Hegseth to meeting after meeting after meeting with senators when his confirmation was very much in question. It was in question in part based on decisions that he made and his behavior around women in the past. So, her going there, I think, softened it. We've seen the reporting that senators who came in ready to ask hard questions about his behavior around women and alcohol, those questions, it's a little more challenging, I think, to press somebody on that when their spouse is sitting right there and has also been through that with them. So I think that's part of it. But really, I mean, ever since, I mean, I went to Brussels separately from the secretary, flew coach, got there, like, we're going to cover it one way or the other. She was around. It was not apparent to me at the time, but she was in a meeting with, allies and partners on Ukraine defense issues. That caught people by surprise. She appeared at a meeting at the Pentagon with British officials. That was a surprise. And she just continues to pop up. And so my story more revealed what was going on away from the cameras, which is to say that she's actively involved in what they're planning, how they're messaging, what they're considering doing next. And hey, what are we missing? Should we be clipping this video? Should we be talking to this particular journalist? Hey, are we handling this or that story in a way that benefits them?
So you also had reporting about the Signal computer, right? Where they had kind of, maybe you can explain that in a second, how they hardwired a separate computer just so he could get access to Signal. But I think the bigger issue I want to dig into, Dan, is it seems to be more revealed every day. Is anybody doing anything about it? Like I saw that, Don Bacon has called for him to resign. I think Pat Ryan wants to cut his salary. But is anybody actually doing anything to stop him from potentially continuing to share what could be classified information over Signal? Have there been any changes since all this news has come out?
The short thing is, I think it's very unclear. I mean, there's basically two watchdogs at the moment that can actually take an active role in this. One is the press. You're going to continue to see reporting on this, and this is not only with sources who are hostile to Hegseth, but some that are, still in the building, some who are, kind of watching what's going on and concerned and not going to scream it from a rooftop, but, like there's reporting to be done around that too. The second piece of this is there is an active Inspector General review of his handling of Signal and his handling of classified information. He has said repeatedly that there was no classified information on that chat and on the, what the Atlantic reported in March. A lot of professionals, a lot of very seasoned people, Admiral McRaven being one, have said point blank, there is no way that would not be classified. In that moment prior to the attack, to say these aircraft, these time hacks, these weapons, that's going to be classified in the moment. It won't matter 3 days after the attack, but it's going to be classified in the moment. So it just didn't ring true for a lot of people.
Tell us about the Signal computer, please.
Yeah, that was a curveball. And I had been hearing prior to the reporting coming out for some time that there was just frustration among the Hegseth team about the lack of cell phone service in the Pentagon. And that's an old issue. Like I deal with it too, right?
Yeah.
Like there are specific places you can go in the building where you can shoot a message to an editor, where you can check to make sure you didn't miss 15 messages on your day job. Like, yeah, that's the nature of the beast in the Pentagon. You go to the courtyard, you go to a handful of specific stairwells. It's just what you have to work around. This apparently frustrated them a great deal. And what emerged post the first Signal story and the second Signal story coming is that not only were they frustrated with it and looking for a solution, but they were able to get Hegseth Signal in his skiff, in his compartmented, highly classified office by hardwiring a computer that basically spoofed or cloned, I suppose is the right word, what his app was saying on his cell phone. So his cell phone, in theory, would not be in the skiff. However, his Signal app still was running on a desktop computer in the skiff. Kind of an end around, kind of creative. Again, I think there are people who would question why that's necessary at all. I think there are others who would say, well, that's not the end of the world as long as we're handling Signal correctly with classified information. And for me, it was newsworthy and important regardless, considering everything else we already knew.
And to your knowledge, is it still there now? And
I'm unclear where it was, if it's still in running now. There has been no dispute that they did this. There has been no dispute that they set this up. Numerous outlets confirmed it after we did our story last week. I had the initial story about there being a computer. The Associated Press advanced that by saying they had actually hardwired a separate network so that it was running separately from classified information. Kind of implied my story, but they laid it out in very clear detail. I thought it was important that we had both pieces out there. And CNN had a story that labeled the individual involved in making this happen, which is a Marine Corps Colonel, Ricky Barea, who abruptly retired and is now going to become a political advisor on Hegseth's team.
So there was some reporting that he was, using it for fantasy football and any other number of potential like normal things. But I think the bigger issue is there's no real way to assess the degree to which this is vulnerable to espionage, right? From external. I mean, there's absolutely no precedent for it whatsoever. I can't imagine this kind of reporting around Chuck Hagel or Bob Gates or anybody else and having it not be a big issue. But it is, there's no confirmation it's not happening anymore. And there's no way to assess how vulnerable it could make him, the Pentagon, and those around him, right?
Yeah, I've got no great read on that. My reporting would bear out that messages were exchanged. There were people that thought that they also may be sending text messages in a similar fashion from the same device. But in terms of fantasy football and all of that, I saw that as a lot of rumors and hot takes and speculation. I don't know if any of that happened. But one way or the other, it's a network that wouldn't usually be in the room, a very sensitive room, and everybody would be left to wonder, is this necessary? Why is it necessary if so? And why can't you just work around the system that you have already?
I mean, you can't say it, but I can. That's fucking bonkers. Like, it's so unacceptable and unbelievable for any of us who've worked in national security. It's kind of hard to wrap our heads around the level of audacity and vulnerability is unprecedented. I'm being generous when I say unprecedented. But let me ask you, Dan, if I can, about the larger atmosphere. It feels like they're eating their own now. He's fired at least 3, 4, 5, maybe of his own former personal advisors. I know you can't disclose sources, but I will speculate that these 3 guys are probably having a lot to do with the stories we're seeing now. And there seems to be everything from the makeup room to the ongoing signal use. It seems like they continue to chip away at him. And some of them, including I think Caldwell, have said they want him. They think he should step down. Can you describe it? Is it a feeding frenzy? Are they eating their own? Can you describe what's going on as much as you can?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I have to be careful in describing sources. I would say that Hegseth has made it clear who he thinks the sources are. He has said several times that these are disgruntled former employees. I won't comment one way or the other on that, but I would say that he doesn't have a good read on who the sources are. He's guessing. And it's way more than a couple people involved here. There are a lot of people who have been watching for quite a while now, and they're concerned. So in bits and pieces, depending on the story, they're willing to speak up. The Jennifer Hegseth story is a good example. The Signalgate story is a good example. These are not all the same people in all these sources. They're all seeing different things.
Are there more that you anticipate will go public? I mean, Caldwell went on Tucker Carlson. Others have been out there publicly. They're not just going to go away, right? It seems like people want him out. So do you have any read on if more people are to come, if more firings are to come, and if anyone is going to be even more aggressive and maybe more senior in speaking out against him?
Yeah, I mean, fair question, right? We're always looking for those people too.
Yeah.
And as soon as somebody's ousted, no doubt their phone will start ringing from reporters and members of Congress and everyone else who's trying to see what they don't know yet. And not just, hey, here's what you can tell me, but like, how can you prove it, right? What backing do you have for this, right? Do you have any paperwork? Do you have any, emails, text messages, anything that would verify any of the claims you're making? And that's always a part of the discussion. It's not just like pop off based on what, Joe Blow says because he's mad he got fired. It's got to be in detail, and it's got to be in detail with people still in the building too. So that's a piece of the puzzle. Often where these stories end up, you end up speaking with 6, 8, 10, 12 people, depending on the story. The versions don't always match. So what usually is actually reported is the overlap. Where I can say that these 5 people saw basically the same thing from a different angle, slight different variations, but you can feel confident on balance on the facts on the overlap. Sometimes you got to leave the rest out, or sometimes you come back at the rest later. Today's story sometimes begets more conversations tomorrow.
So, I mean, I've noticed there've been a couple of stories popping up on Daily Mail, which hasn't exactly had a really deep national security beat, to my knowledge, until now. Politico, where John Alliott wrote an op-ed. It just feels like they're wanting to chip away at him. Let me ask you this. Do you think he survives? It seems like it ebbs and flows, but maybe most importantly, as I've noted, he seems to be struggling on TV, which has been what he is best at. He looks shook. He looks rattled. He's not doing any sit down and exposed interviews. And that's part of what Trump, I think, loved about him, was that he was so good on TV. Do you have any reporting on possible successors or names that are being floated to replace him, or any read on whether or not he's going to survive?
I don't have a good read. There are a lot of people wondering at this point. There's a lot of people around the White House that I've talked to who have a read that they're concerned, who have a read that they are trying to make sure they have a full understanding for the situation. A lot of them are still rooting for Pete. They're still hoping that Pete can figure it out. You saw comments from the president this week that basically said, I think he'll get there. That would imply that he doesn't think he's fully there now. So I think that's kind of the vibe at the moment of, this is not good. Maybe he can course correct. Maybe he can't. Maybe there's more we don't know that would be even more troubling. Maybe there's not. But one way or the other, there's a microscope on Pete Hegseth right now, and I think that goes to why he is handling some of the things the way he's handling, which is to say, he's not doing any kind of adversarial interviews or even neutral interviews. He is just speaking to his own choir, basically. He's only speaking to the right-wing media.
And he's sucking up all the oxygen. So other really important things, I think, are getting lost, like we have a new chairman of the Joint Chiefs, right? General Kane is now there. He's been confirmed. 25, I think, votes of Democrats against him, but now he's in place. He denied, I think, in his confirmation hearings that Trump gave him a MAGA hat. There was a question of whether or not he was going to be a loyalist to Trump, but then you saw McRaven in public giving him a vote of support and saying he was a person of integrity and character. What's your read on Kane so far and the reaction in the building to him as an outsider and the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs?
He's keeping a very low profile. I think there are a lot of reasonable reasons why he would be doing so. You limit your exposure to these problems. You limit your need to answer questions for something that you yourself didn't do. I think that's strategy-wise, that's not a unreasonable thing to jump to. It does mean he's a bit removed. Like, we don't have a great sense for who he is yet, and I'm hoping at some point there will be conversations and specific interviews, and maybe that comes 3 months, 6 months, or something in. Give him a bit of a track record, but that's where we are right now. Yes, McRaven spoke out in his favor on national television. I did a profile of General Kane right before his confirmation hearing. High up in that story, I had retired General David Goldfein, who is seen as a reasonable, thoughtful, nonpartisan leader. Someone who was looked at for the chairman job himself when he was in uniform, and did serve as chief of staff of the Air Force. The fact that Kane has people like that in his corner, I think at least speaks to the idea that people have an open mind, and that while Trump cast him a certain way as a loyalist, as a MAGA officer, all of those sorts of things, people who know him well don't see him that way. So then it really comes down to, okay, can you navigate this job, which is extremely challenging in the most normal of circumstances. So now you've got all of the political dynamics, the turmoil on the political appointee side of the building, and you're trying to navigate that in a way where you don't get dragged into it.
Dan, it feels like June and July are going to be especially interesting with potential Supreme Court decisions, increased protests around the country, it looks like, including protests in Washington. There's a story that's kind of always floating around, but I don't think really driven to ground enough, which is what could happen with the Insurrection Act. Where is it, right? There was a recommendation or a proposal that was due to the president, I believe, on April 20th. It was reported that Kristi Noem and Hegseth said they did not recommend invoking the Insurrection Act at this time. but is it now there for him to use at his disposal if he feels he wants to give it a shot? Or can you give us a breakdown on your read or what we should be thinking about with regard to where the Insurrection Act is in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, he can invoke it. But if you're going to invoke it on a whim with not a whole lot going on, I think that induces a crisis on its own that I'm not sure he wants. Despite the way he casts things, he's also not looking to necessarily go there unless something extraordinary happens. We had all this conversation in the first Trump administration in the aftermath of murder of George Floyd. And there were protests in a lot of cities, and a lot of those protests extended well beyond just being peaceful. So I think that would be where I would start watching very closely. Do you see protests? Are they rallies, or do they extend well beyond that into some sort of violence, things that look bad on camera, that sort of thing? And I think that's the point where I would start saying, what's the conversation look like this behind the scenes? Right now, I don't think we're there.
To me, it feels like a hammer that's cocked and they can find a reason to pull the trigger, right? Whether it's protests in Washington or attacks on Tesla dealerships or something at the border. It seems to me like now it's there, right? And if they want to seek out a reason to give it a try, they can find it. And it points me down to the border. You, I think, have reported on this 60-foot stretch that crosses 3 states in the southern border where now troops have arrest authority. This feels like an expansion that we've never seen before. Before I let you go, can you talk about that and what people should be looking for?
Yeah, I scooped that in February that they were considering it and planning around the idea that this concept that they would develop some sort of basically extended military base on the border. What they've done is they've taken this 60-foot strip that President Roosevelt basically set aside for border security way back in the day. It had been under control of the Department of the Interior and said this is now DOD turf, more or less, for the next several years. It is to be handled by DOD. There is still CBP on the border. But where you've gone is the active duty on the border often felt like their hands were tied. They were allowed to observe. They were allowed to report. They could defend themselves if something like that came to pass. But generally speaking, they were pretty passive. And the idea was, hey, more eyes and ears. Something happens, we'll call CBP. And a lot of people said that wasn't good enough. So now you've seen this new plan invoked. It's starting with the border around New Mexico. And it basically, this Roosevelt Reservation runs the length of New Mexico, Arizona, California. They're starting with New Mexico. And basically, you've taken this strip along the New Mexico border and assigned it back to Fort Huachuca in Arizona and said this is now a satellite, basically, of Fort Huachuca. Therefore, not unlike if I wandered onto a military base in Virginia, U.S. troops are going to come and roll you up and detain you and then turn you back over to, the Justice Department and CBP and the actual legal authorities. It's arrest is probably not the term they're using, but they are using detention at this point. And I would note that when I first started reporting out this story earlier this year and had a couple of early versions of what they were planning to do, I was told over and over, U.S. troops will be allowed to hold, not detain. In press releases more recently, they're now saying U.S. troops have the right to detain. So even that is shifting over time.
So CBP is Customs Border Patrol. It kind of feels almost like some kind of dystopian imminent domain. So that brings me to maybe the last question. Are there other sites like this in America that they could do this with? I mean, I never heard of the Roosevelt Reservation, the 60-foot strip of land. Are there other places, I don't know, in Brooklyn around Fort Hamilton, or other places they can just all of a sudden say are military land and do the same thing?
I have absolutely no reporting to suggest that they are considering this, but there actually is a very similar buffer zone on the northern border called the Taft Reservation. So yeah, in theory, I guess they could do the same thing with Canada. I have seen no actual discussion. I have no reporting that would suggest they're going there. But yeah, there's always something else they can do.
Well, if they do, I know you'll be on it. Dan Lamothe, your reporting continues to be critical and vital and a true public and patriotic service. I appreciate all you're doing, especially in times like this. Thank you for coming here and helping us break it down. I'm sure you'll have a scoop every 24 hours for the rest of the week. So I encourage everyone to follow all your reporting. Dan Lamothe, thank you for joining us again on Independent Americans. Appreciate all you do, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
There you have it, the great Dan Lamothe. My deepest thanks to him for joining us again and for his continued patriotic, intrepid work defending our democracy against enemies foreign and domestic. Dan Lamothe is a true leader, and he's also a true helper. In times like this, we need to look for the helpers. Now more than ever, look for the helpers. The helpers are out there, just like the trees and the leaves and the flowers are finally out there here in Central Park and all across America and around the world. This show, like the flowers and the trees, continues to blossom. After 5 years and over 300 episodes, our message continues to grow and spread all across this country. If you like what you heard, please tell a friend. Whether you like what you heard or you didn't, please give me a shout on our phone number. Here it is right here. I'd love to hear what you think of this episode with Dan Lamothe. I'd love your suggestions on future guests and send any questions you have for me. In upcoming episodes, I'll play some of your messages, I'll play some of your questions, and I always appreciate hearing your feedback. And be sure to go to independentamericans.us, where you can join our Patreon community. Big shout out to all of our patrons who continue to help me keep this independent content going. I appreciate all of you. You can join them for just $5. You can become a Patreon member. If you like this show, is it worth $5 to you? Is it worth $1 to you? If it is, go to independentamericans.us right now and join our Patreon community. You'll also get an advanced preview of all our episodes, including this one. You'll get content without commercials, and you'll get behind the scenes and extra content as well. You also get a discount on merch, which is at independentamericans.us. If you haven't gotten anything for Mother's Day and you need something for that independent mother in your life, or you want to get ahead on Father's Day, go to independentamericans.us and you can get some very cool Independent Americans merchandise. Before we wrap this episode, just like in every podcast, I've got a few pieces of personal insight or information or wisdom that I want to share with you, especially as we all get into May and summer approaches. Here they are, my Rieckhoff's recommendations. This episode, I've got 2 recommendations. Number 1, breathe. Try it with me right now. Ready? It's stressful out there. For many of us, times are hard, and there's no shortage of chaos flying at us. And it can be hard to create some personal mental space in the midst of all the stress of daily life. And there's something I try to do often, never often enough, but I encourage my kids to do and I encourage you to do. Try a couple times a day, maybe after each meal. Stop and take 3 deep breaths. And if you can, before you walk into any room, before you walk into a classroom, before you walk into your job, before you walk back into your house, stop and take 3 deep breaths. Let's try it right now together. Even if you only do it right now, let's try it right now. Especially if you're watching or listening on YouTube, or you're out for a walk, or you're driving in your car. Let's do it together as a community. 3 deep breaths. Ready, folks? Don't you feel at least a little bit better? You definitely don't feel worse. I hope it helps. And my final recommendation for this week. Mother's Day is just a few weeks away. Call a mother. If you're lucky enough to have and like your mother, call your mother. If you don't have your mother anymore, call a mother in your life that you love, appreciate, or respect. The NFL draft was last week, and I love watching it, most of all because I see so many proud parents, fathers and mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers and mother figures for so many people who don't have a mother in their life. So they're out there. Someone that you know. Could be a young mother, could be a grandmother, could be a mother you work with. As we approach Mother's Day, let them know you love them. Let them know you appreciate them. Let them know that you see them. And help make Mother's Day a little bit better for all the mothers out there. Because we are certainly going to need them in the weeks and days to come. And a special shout out to my mother, who watches or listens to every single episode of this show and has from the start. Ma, you've always been in my corner. You've always been there for us, and I love you so, so much. I want to wish you a very happy Mother's Day, and thank you for all that you do. Ma, I love you. So, to all you mothers out there and to all you mothers out there, remember that the future is full of mothers and fathers and sons and daughters, but the future is also full of independence. This May, independent Americans especially are rising to meet the moment, and we're going to continue to do that with this show. Light over heat, country over party, people over politics. And if you're among the now 50% of Americans who are independent, this is your show and this is your movement. If you are a Democrat or a Republican and you are fed up with all of this, you're fed up with the parties, you are politically homeless, or you just want an alternative, this is your home. And if you enjoyed this episode with Dan Lamothe, please share it far and wide and invite others to declare their independence. And know that you're not alone in your vigilance. We're all vigilant, and we're all in this together. Until next time, I'm your host, Paul Rieckhoff. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching on YouTube. Until next time, down with Hamas, down with Putin, Slava Ukraine, and stay vigilant, America. Enjoy spring, and happy May.
Powered by Righteous Media.